The Docklands Light Rail system is a metro designed to connect up East London. It started out as a fairly basic set of lines, but since then it's expanded to cover all sorts of places. For instance, did you know that you can get to Cyprus? How about East India? Today I thought I'd take a look at some of these rather incongruous places in East London and ask how they got their names. Now you might already have figured out that it's something to do with where the railway runs, the Docklands. This was once a vast zone of industry with goods converging on it from all over the world. In the heyday of the Docklands, Britain had an empire stretching across the globe. Britain itself was a manufacturing powerhouse. Its docks were the point of exchange with the entire world. So with that in mind, it's pretty obvious that East India is called that because it's the home of the East India Docks. Now that name in itself is quite interesting. The docks were opened in 1803, and were the point of departure for ships of the East India Company. The East India Company were basically your historic evil mega corporation. I mean, say what you like about Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, but they don't have private armies, as far as I'm aware. The East India Company did. It was formed in 1600 to trade with the East Indies, and more about what that meant in a bit. By the time the docks were opened, the company, or John Company as it was nicknamed, was the largest trading organisation in the world. It had its own private army, it ran courts, and it was the de facto ruler of much of the Indian subcontinent. In fact, they made more money off taxing territory they controlled than they did off actual trade. Needless to say that their pursuit of profit came at the expense of the people of India, and this culminated in the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Indian Mutiny or the First Indian War of Independence. John Company was booted off the seat of power, and rule was transferred to the British Crown. The company limped on for a little while before being dissolved in 1874. East India meant something rather different in the 1600s. The East Indies, or just the Indies, was a term used by Europeans to refer to lands in the Eastern Hemisphere. What's now the country of India was just one of these lands. During British colonial rule, i.e. after John Company left, the term India was officially applied to the territory acquired, which was bounded to the west by the river Indus. All this leads me on to West India Quay. Of course, whereas the East India Docks traded with the East Indies, the West India Docks traded with the West Indies, which are nowhere near the East Indies. Basically what happened was this. Your man Christopher Columbus set off in 1492 looking to find a sea route to the Indies, heading west. When he hit land, he was certain that the land he hit was the Indies. There was no doubt about it. Definitely, for sure, this was definitely the Indies. 100%. Well, of course, it wasn't. What he'd hit was the Americas. Perhaps in a spirit of diplomacy towards Columbus, who had after all gone an awfully long way, the Spanish declared that the Indies he'd been looking for were the East Indies, and these two new continents and the various islands around them were the West Indies. These days, the term West Indies tends to refer to the Caribbean. The West India trade is as controversial as the East India trade for different reasons. Britain was a corner of the triangle trade. British manufactured goods were traded in Africa for people. Those people were sold as slaves in the West Indies. The commodities they produced were sold in Britain and the British Empire. Sugar, cotton, and tobacco were the most in-demand commodities, and the plantation owners became extraordinarily rich. The slave trade was abolished in 1807, and slavery in British colonies was finally stamped out in 1838. The construction of the West India Docks was carried out at the behest of a group of businessmen led by Robert Milligan, who had a statue put up here in his honour in 1813. Milligan had made his fortune in the slave trade, which led to the statue being removed in 2020. History is complicated, and Lord knows my silly little videos aren't going to resolve anything. The area around the West India Docks is perhaps better known these days as Canary Wharf. That name is more recent, but if you guessed that it's something to do with the Canary Islands, you'd be right. Fruit Lines Limited had a quay and warehouse here, importing fruit from, among other places, the Canary Islands. The Canary Island fruit trade is something that came about through a quirk of geography and through steam power. Las Palmas was an important port because it was the last coaling station before the Americas for ships leaving Europe. So a gentleman named Alfred Jones set up a business in 1886 bringing high-quality coal from Wales to the Canary Islands. To maximise his profits, he sent his ships back full of local fruit. And that's how bananas became a big part of the British diet. In 1937, Fruit Lines commemorated the trade by naming their wharf Canary Wharf. No fruit ships call here anymore, but there is an echo of the old trade in that changing trains here will drive you bananas. Finally, there's Cyprus, and this has nothing to do with any trade. Cyprus was a workers' town. In 1880, the Royal Albert Dock opened, which was a vast basin designed to hold the biggest ships in the world. It made the East and West India docks look like duck ponds. But it was also kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so a new town was built to house the workers, which opened in 1881. In 1878, the island of Cyprus became a British protectorate under the terms of an agreement with the Ottoman Empire. Therefore, it was considered patriotic to name this new town after a British territory. I'm planning on looking at Cyprus, the town, in more detail in a future video, so keep an eye on this channel for that. It's not on the DLR, but I feel like it would be a little unfair if we didn't at least mention Canada Water. Again, it's nowhere near the place it's named after, but again it commemorates the old trade. In this case, timber from Canada. The exotic names on the DLR are fascinating to me, not just because they seem incongruous, but because of what they can teach us about the history of Britain and its place in the world. It's a complex legacy, and frankly this channel is not the place to analyse it. But however you view it, it's a reminder that London is its history. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. Are there any other curiously exotic place names in London that have you wondering? If so, maybe there's a video in that. Let me know in the comments section. I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon and here on YouTube for your support. You are the bananas to my empty boat. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.